Well, hi there. Welcome back to Human Systems Engineering 542, Foundations of Human Systems Engineering. I got an important question for you. Did you get your Cheetos orange flavored lip balm? No, actually, it's not even orange flavored. It's just Cheetos flavored lip balm. Did you get that? I don't think I got some of that. How about this stuff? Did you get any of this funky purple Heinz Easy Squirt ketchup? Apparently, it goes over your fries. It tastes just like regular ketchup, same as regular, but it's purple. But if you don't like purple, don't worry about it. You've got this Easy Squirt Blastin' Green Heinz ketchup, so you got that opportunity. Well, let me ask you about this. How about this? How about your Colgate TV dinners? Did you get that? I would assume you probably got that. Or, they also make beef lasagna. That might be tasty. How about your Frito-Lay lemonade? Did you get any Frito-Lay lemonade? Somebody thought you might like that, some marketing organization for Frito-Lay. Maybe you're familiar with this one. This is the McDLT sandwich. This doesn't exist anymore, but focus groups kind of said that what they would really like is the hot part of their sandwich to remain hot, and the cold part of their sandwich, like the lettuce and things like that, to remain cold. So what they did is they crafted this kind of package here where the hot part would be over here on the right-hand side. That's the hot patty, as you can see, and everything else would be over here on your left-hand side. And boy, McDonald's really tried to sell this a lot, and it turns out that it failed. Well, it failed for a number of reasons, but one of the reasons was that an awful lot of people, more than 50%, get their McDonald's through a drive-through. So now imagine you've gone through the drive-through and your next job is to assemble your hamburger, all the while you're trying to pull out into heavy traffic as you leave the McDonald's parking lot. Never mind the fact that the thing is huge. Imagine if you bought 4 or 5 of these things and how much space they take up in your car and passing them around to the kids and all of those kinds of things. It didn't do very well, even though focus groups said it would be, that it would do well. How about this guy? This is the Jimmy Dean pancakes and sausage on a stick with chocolate chips. Certainly you must have gotten that. That seems like a pretty much of a winner. You might remember this one. You remember this fellow? This is called Clippy. And Clippy was on your word processor, usually Microsoft Word or something like that. And when it looked like you had some difficulty or stopped typing for a little bit, it assumed you were confused, and maybe what you would really want is some advice from this little animated paperclip. Turns out people hated Clippy, and really with a white hot hatred, and he had to go away. I'll just mention a couple others just for kicks. You might be familiar with Wow. This was a set of chips. So you had potato chips and nacho chips, Doritos and Ruffles and all of those kinds of things that were treated with this stuff called, or made in this stuff called Olestra. And Olestra was a kind of cooking oil, I guess, that was all fat-free. And, it would have taken off pretty well if it weren't for the diarrhea that came along with it. It caused all kinds of problems amongst people who ate these things. Abdominal cramping, diarrhea, anal leakage. The usual kinds of things wouldn't want if they were to eat potato chips. So that kind of fell on its face. This is a classic one. This is called the New Coke. And New Coke came out briefly, 1985. And what had happened was Coca-Cola was concerned about the challenge coming along from Pepsi. Pepsi had a pretty good soda, pretty good cola out there, and they were fighting against Pepsi. So what they did is did a bunch of taste tests in which people would get these little just cups, like Dixie cups, full of either Coca-Cola or Pepsi, and they would taste them and decide which ones they wanted. And Coca-Cola started modifying their their recipe. And they made it a little bit sweeter, and they got it to the point where if you took these two different Dixie cups and drank them, people actually preferred the New Coke one, even though they couldn't, they were unlabeled, so they didn't know it was New Coke. It was sweeter, so they liked it more. Now, when they actually rolled it out, it did terribly. It failed just terribly, and there was a giant uprising of old Coca-Cola fans who absolutely hated this idea. These guys were, you might consider them brand zealots. Coca-Cola was something they grew up on and they had good feelings about, and suddenly you just replaced this Coke. Further, it was too sweet. And what we mean by that is, if you gave just somebody a small Dixie cup, yeah, that tasted better than the Pepsi Cola. But if you gave them a full can, 12 fluid ounces, it was just too syrupy, and it was just too sweet. And as a result, they didn't like New Coke at all, and Coca-Cola had to reintroduce the old Coke, calling it Coke Classic. I thought this one was interesting. This is the Rejuvenique facial toning mask. So imagine you're getting some wrinkles, getting a little up there in years, and you want to rejuvenate your face. You simply put on this, and it gives you some kind of electrophysical therapy, in other words, shock therapy to your face. And it's scary looking, it's creepy. Not surprisingly, nobody would have wanted to put this on their face. So I just thought I'd show you some interesting products that people actually expected to work along the way, so much so that they actually went to market, and of course lost lots and lots of money, resulted in tremendous embarrassment, and even has professors like me making fun of it years later. Well, so I thought I would use that as an example, or a nice sort of introduction to human-centered design. When we talk about human factors in human systems engineering, we tend to employ a process called human-centered design, and it's pretty basic in some ways. It has four basic tenets. One is we have an early and constant focus on our users and their tasks. We want to know everything about what they do, why they do it, when they do it, the problems they have, what we could do to make it better, etc. And we start really early on in the design process, and we carry that on throughout the design process. The second part is kind of a scientific approach to this. That is, we rely on data, empirical evaluation of user performance with the system, data to help us figure out what is working and what isn't working. And we go back and fix what isn't working, and of course we capitalize on and do more of what is working. Now that requires us to iterate. That is, we get a prototype out, we get it in front of people, we do something like a usability test with people, for example. We identify what's very difficult with the product and what is not, and we go back and we fix what's difficult with the product, and then we test it again, and then we go back and do it again, and then we do it again. We might do that several times. And then finally, sometimes we ask people to design with us. That is, we are interested in them kind of pitching in and joining the design team to some degree. Now, we're not giving up our design capabilities or our design responsibilities. We're still the designers in all of this. But often when you have people design with you, they get very involved and they tell you more than they ordinarily would. They remember, frankly, more than they ordinarily would if you were just asking them questions and they were just providing answers. And that's what I mean by participatory design, and that's what this set of lectures is going to go through. It'll handle a lot of human-centered design, the tenets of human factors in the design process, and so on. So one of the things that I'm convinced did not happen with those products I just told you about was this kind of process. Oh, somebody must have told them in a focus group that, Cheetos flavored lip balm was a good idea. But I don't know that they really ever got it in front of people and iterated on it, because it's a horrible idea. Any of us could recognize that. So in order to do this, we have to understand how to do some research. And I'm going to talk this time around about qualitative research. But let's discuss exactly what research is, because I think sometimes people get confused. Human factors research involves gathering, analyzing, and interpreting data. And we have to answer these questions in ways that are objective, systematic, and repeatable. So by objective, we mean that the conclusions are based on data rather than our intuition. Of course, as human beings, we all have intuition, we all have opinions and so forth, but we need to be objective and go with what the data is telling us, because intuitions vary from person to person, even moment to moment. Objective, that is, objectivity, is difficult, it's unnatural, it takes discipline, it takes a whole lot of work. So we, because objectivity is kind of unnatural to human beings, we try to improve that by using specific research methods that are designed to answer questions while reducing bias, and we'll discuss what those research methods are. So the purpose, most importantly, of research is to answer questions. The whole reason we do research is to go off and figure out, boy, we've got specific questions about how people behave, what they want, what they like, what they hate, all of those kinds of things. And rather than us just intuiting what those things are, as if, well, people want exactly the same things we want, we're going to go off and find those things out. So one way to think about it is research in general is being scientific about gathering observations or data and interpreting the meaning of those data. It can be conducted in laboratory and real-world environments. The ones we'll talk about today will be mostly real-world environments. Later on, we'll talk about more laboratory environments. And I think it's really important to be familiar with a wide range of methods, because different types of methods are particularly good for kind of answering different kinds of questions and different kinds of situations. So the idea over time is to develop a nice sort of toolbox of your own that you can go to and say, oh, I need to answer this particular kind of question. I know that that particular research method will be really helpful in doing that. So let's kind of provide some context for research, especially when it comes to design. Not all research is the same, of course, there's different kinds. But imagine early on in your design process, when you're just trying to come up with ideas, for example, of what to design to begin with, what people like, what they don't like, what the hassles are, what the problems are, what the opportunities are. At that point, we're kind of trying to generate ideas. That is, this particular research phase is what we call generative research. And the idea behind generative research is to come up with an idea. What kinds of research ideas are out there? What features and functionality should a product have? All of those kinds of things. And we can get there by doing some of these kinds of activities. We can interview people. We can observe them while they're doing their work or other types of things, play potentially. We can conduct a task analysis, which we'll learn about. We can do participatory design where they design with us. We can generate ideas amongst ourselves through brainstorming and things like that. We can look at trend analysis and literature that exists in understanding the demographics and the geographics and the age of people and things like that. Those are all things that we can do to kind of generate new ideas of what to build, what to design, what to sell. Later on, once we have those ideas, then we will generally create a prototype of those kinds of ideas. And then during that period of time, what we want to do is evaluate that prototype. So the first time you design anything, I don't care what it is, it's not going to be good. That's just not how it works. Instead, the way it works is you tend to get your first draft out, so to speak, your first mock-up, your first prototype, and you evaluate that thing, and then you go back and fix it. And then you do that again, and you do it several times in an iterative process. So that's called evaluative research. Usability tests, cognitive walkthroughs, cognitive modeling, interviews, again in interviews here, when people are responding to a prototype, that is all evaluative. So that's the second type of research. And then finally, after you've released the product into the real world and people are using it and so forth, we call that experiential research. That is, then you're studying how people are actually using the product. And here are some examples of things you can do there. So if you think about the ways we can collect data about people when we're doing research about product design, they kind of fit pretty well into three different categories. So if you think about market research, especially market research some time ago, mainly they focused on what people said. That is, they really focused on verbal reports. They would do interviews and focus groups and questionnaires and surveys and things like that. And people would tell them what they thought, and then they would take those data and they would use those as their marching orders to figure out what to design. On the other hand, over time, especially when they started producing products like the ones we just discussed at the beginning of all of this, they began to recognize that what people say and what they do can be pretty darn different things. And a new type of approach was taken on, which is focusing on what people do in the real world. And that usually involved some kind of observation. So we'd observe what people do, and we'd watch them in their sort of natural habitat, so to speak. We might do things like eye tracking. We might intercept people in the store and ask to walk along with them and observe them and so forth. That was focusing on what people do. Well, not surprisingly, if you can sort of combine those two things, what people say and what people do, you end up with even better data than if you were to look at any one alone. Well, remember I also mentioned a third thing, which was participatory design. And that is what people make. That is, if we ask people to sit down and work with us, they'll create things that we hadn't thought of, and perhaps even they hadn't thought of beforehand, that also informs our design. It makes us smarter designers at that point. What we're often trying to do in design research, you can call it user research, user experience research, human factors research, all of those modifiers, is we're usually trying to look for some type of convergence. That is, we're looking for situations where what people say, what they do, and what they make, what they create for us, tend to have pretty darn similar themes. That is, they converge on one way of kind of thinking about the opportunities, thinking about the answers. So typically what we're looking for is kind of this convergence between what people say, that is their verbal report, what they do in their natural work, and what they make when they're doing participatory design with us. When we've reached that sort of level, we have an awful lot of confidence that we're zeroing in on the actual truth of what people want and need and will buy eventually and will use. So that's kind of a quick introduction to qualitative user research. We're going to pick up more in the next video and talk about some of the interviewing techniques as well as literature review techniques, really focusing on what people say, that is their verbal report. Following that, we'll then talk about what people do, we'll talk about observational research, and finally what people make, that is participatory design.